Hey Islanders, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. On August the 6th and 7th, 2026, a Korean broadcaster called JTBC ran an exclusive report. It shook Korean football. Honestly, it shook football everywhere. Let's go back to February 29th, 2012, just after midnight. A few hours later, South Korea would face Kuwait at Seoul World Cup Stadium in a World Cup qualifier. But that night, someone paid about 500,000 won at a massage parlor in Gangnam. The payment went on a Korea Football Association corporate card. That's roughly $400. The payment was for two referees, the same two referees who would blow the whistles at the match. And this massage parlor bill included the cost of buying sex. We know this because the staff member who processed the payment testified about it directly. This wasn't a one-time thing. From March 2011 to March the following year, roughly 20 people were treated this way across 7 matches. Those matches were World Cup qualifiers, Olympic qualifiers, and friendlies. And in the matches, these referees officiated. Korea won 5 and drew 2. Korea never lost a single one. Association staff swiped the corporate card at bars, massage parlors, and karaoke rooms. And there was one more figure in the room, the match commissioner. This commissioner wasn't part of the association and wasn't even Korean. FIFA and the Asian Football Confederation send these commissioners to every match. Their whole job is to make sure the host country can't quietly influence the referees. A former association official told the JTBC that when they arrange a sex for referees, they time the payment around midnight. That way, the commissioner wouldn't notice. But on the day of Qatar match, it was the commissioner who got this treatment. In the middle of the game that evening, someone made a payment for him at a massage business. Think about that for a second. In one match, the person sent to match for unfairness was someone they had to hide from. In other match, he was the very person they needed to win over. All of this actually came out once before in a 2016 audit by the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism. But that audit wasn't even looking for this. The real target was something bigger. Association staff, past and present, has swiped corporate cards thousands of times at bars, massage businesses, karaoke rooms, and golf courses. That ran up a massive bill. This audit was about reckless spending and stolen funds across the whole organization. The referee bribery was just one line buried inside a massive pile of documents. At the time, it was never separately made public. Remember what else was happening in Korea in 2016? A much bigger political scandal, one that would eventually bring down a president, was consuming the entire country's attention. When someone later asked the ministry why they never released the sex bribery findings to the press or the public, the ministry's answer was simple. They called it too sensitive to share. And in the end, prosecutors at the time closed the case for insufficient evidence. That's despite having the corporate cards records, the receipts, and testimony from people directly involved. So why did this resurface now, a decade later? By the summer of 2026, the Korea Football Association was already in serious trouble. The national team had been knocked out of the World Cup group stage, and public opinion had turned sharply against the organization. On top of that, a controversy over how the national team coach was selected had triggered an intense investigation. This time, police actually raided the association's offices. That had never happened before, not once in the organization's 91-year history. Not long before that, the National Assembly's Culture, Sports, and Tourism Committee held a hearing. They pressed the association on the coaching selection mess and on unclear spending. During that process, one lawmaker's office demanded the documents from the association. That's when they pulled the old 2016 audit file back out. Buried inside it was the item about sex bribery for referees. JTBC investigated it and reported it. So, what dug this truth back up wasn't some sense of justice arriving late. It was politics and public opinion looking for another card to play against an association already under fire. Even the way this truth resurfaced was almost accidental. That too is part of this story. The association called this practice. That word matters, and we will come back to it. They said their documents are only kept for 5 years. This happened 15 years ago, so it's hard to confirm every detail now. But they also said they now follow strict internal management guidelines. Is anyone confident the same thing couldn't happen today? Honestly, nobody really knows. The association is currently under intense investigation, so we will have to watch and see. One more detail came out. The staff member who handled the payment worked in the referee department. He said the foreign referees asked for massages first, and he added something else. He said, wouldn't they call a better game for us if we kept them happy? This wasn't a statement of guilt. It was a statement about efficiency. The calculation was simple. Satisfy the other side, and the ruling goes our way. Inside the calculation, a woman was a bargaining chip. A chip has no feelings and no say in the matter. You peel it out when you need it and put it back in the drawer when the game is over. To these men, women weren't people. They were a line item in an entertainment budget, a number on a receipt, something replaceable. That's what sits at the center of this whole story, being treated like an object, not a person. The man who said this wasn't unusually cruel. What matters more is that he could say it without hesitation, without any sense that something was wrong. That tells us this wasn't a new idea someone invented on the spot. It was a procedure that had already hardened into place long before. The documents just happened to survive from those 2 years, but the word practice always implies something that's been going on far longer than that. And here's a question worth sitting with. If foreign referees really did ask for this first, does that mean they already knew this was something you could get in Korea? So, where did that reputation come from? Think about how smoothly the association responded to the request. They could process a corporate card payment before dawn on match day without missing a bit. That's not an improvised reaction. That's a choice sitting inside a playbook that already existed. What's actually frightening here isn't whether someone asked or didn't ask. It's that a system existed inside the organization that could meet that request without a single moment of resistance. And is this something that happens only in Korea? Honestly, we have no way to know that for certain. Were these referees simply overwhelmed by desire? No, this was never really about sex. It's about hierarchy and power. When men buy a woman with money, what actually changes hands isn't sex, it's rank. The side paying is showing a kind of respect. They are acknowledging the other side's power and lifting it even higher. The side receiving it accepts this calmly, and by accepting it, they confirm their own status and power. One side lowers itself to lift the other up. The other side feels satisfied, as if this is simply the treatment they are owed. Whether the final ruling actually favors anyone comes later. The hierarchy is already settled the moment this exchange happens. If someone had just handed over an envelope of cash, that would have been a plain bribe, business-like, over in one bank transfer. But bringing a woman into it changes the entire story. How private the setting was, how carefully it was arranged, how satisfied the other person seemed. All of it gets turned into a measure of respect. A woman's body becomes the way men measure respect for each other. When association staff arranged the sex for a referee, it wasn't only a bribe meant to buy a favorable call. It was something closer to a ritual. The host country was lowering itself before an authority figure from the international stage. And when the referee accepted it, that was its own kind of confirmation, proof that he was someone who deserved this treatment. In the end, both sides wanted the same thing, to use a woman's body to confirm exactly where each of them stood. So, where did this script actually begin in South Korea? The Japanese military system of sexual slavery was violence inflicted on the women of colonial Korea. This was not something Korea did, it was something done to Korea. The Japanese military and government planned, built, and ran these so called comfort stations in the name of fighting a war. It was a human rights violation carried out by a state. The victims were Korean women. The state responsible was Japan. But after liberation, once Korea had reclaimed its sovereignty, this country wrote a strikingly similar script again, this time against its own women. Starting in the 1950s, in towns near US military bases in Korea, there were women known as yanggongju. That literally means Western princess. It's a term that was often used with a real cruelty for women doing sex work around these bases. In 2022, Korea's Supreme Court ruled that the state itself had built, managed, and operated these camp towns. It found that the government had justified and even encouraged sex work there. The court called this a serious human rights violation, one that broke the state's duty to respect human rights. Government officials at the time called these women patriots because they were bringing in foreign currency. Health inspections were mandatory. This was framed as keeping things safer for the men who used these businesses. Phrases like national security and friendship between Korea and the United States became the language used to justify these violations. The same language shows up again in the 1970s and 80s. This time, the target was Japanese tourists. The government kept repeating the idea that earning foreign currency was patriotic. This applied even to the women involved in what became known as gisaeng tourism, named after traditional Korean female entertainers. They felt they had no choice but to describe themselves as working for the future of their families and their country. In 1972, a Japanese travel guide described Korea as a place where a man could satisfy every desire he had. People at the time called this woman Waegongju, meaning Japanese princess. It was a direct echo of yanggongju, the term used for women near US bases. Only the nationality of the man changed. The way people talked about the woman stayed exactly the same. Newspaper series from that era even had a name for one type of arrangement, the local wife. A Japanese tourist would treat a woman like a common law spouse for the length of his short stay, then leave when his flight departed. A wife for the length of a visit, then nothing once the plane took off. That single phrase captures more precisely than anything else exactly how this industry defined these women. Put all of this together and a pattern emerges. Korea is a country whose women were once mobilized by an outside power as a resource for war and empire. And yet, the moment it broke free of that violence and reclaimed its own sovereignty, it recreated that exact same logic against its own women. Not in the name of war this time, but in the name of security alliances and foreign currency. The country that had been the victim learned the grammar of the people who had hurt it and repeated it. As I always say, fascism leaves fascism behind, even after it's gone. And that grammar didn't disappear. It just changed shape, moving through military alliances and the tourism industry, and eventually flowing into the entertainment culture of Korean companies and organizations. When I was in my 20s, this was common among the young men around me. Going to a brothel before starting mandatory military service was treated almost like a rite of passage. Stopping by one during leaves was practically part of the routine. I saw this happen with my own friends when I was in college. The numbers back this up. In a 2025 government survey, 37.7% of adult men said they had paid for sex at least once in their lives. That's roughly half what it was about a decade earlier. But here's the detail that stands out. Men were asked what first led them to pay for sex. The top answers were curiosity and pressure from an older peer. Right after that came preparing for something significant, especially starting military service. Becoming a man and buying a woman's body have been bundled together in Korean society for a long time. It's been passed down from one generation to the next. And now that rite of passage has crossed the border. According to a 2025 investigation by the women's news and organization Taktin Nail, flights between Korea and Laos have jumped sharply. There was 207 in 2015. By 2024, that number had climbed to 604. Reporters confirm at least 14 sex businesses in Vientiane, the capital of Laos. All of them were run by Koreans. One review website for these businesses, running since 2023, had already logged over 30 million views. And on its review boards, comments describing very young girls as untouched showed up without any hesitation. More and more Korean men are staying a full month at a time specifically for this. That demand has even started reshaping the local real estate market, driving up rents in certain neighborhoods. Activists from Taktin Nail tracked a Telegram group with more than 700 members. Reporters call this group Laos and Room, a direct reference to the digital sex crime ring that shook Korean society back in 2020. The name traveling across the border tells you something on its own. Inside that group chat, photos of women believed to be minors were shared openly. So was information about what's called a cage. That means a business that locks up children and teenagers for sex work. Last year, one of these businesses was found with a 7-year-old child inside. And despite all of this, almost no one involved has actually been punished. Laos criminal law technically holds buyers accountable too, but Korean police have no authority to investigate there. Without physical evidence, there is no way to prove anything. The law exists, but there is no one able to enforce it once you cross the border. Inside Korea, the word practice has stirred how seriously these cases get punished. Outside Korea, a gap in legal authority fills that same role. Half a century ago, Japanese tourists came to Korea to buy women. Now that exact structure has flipped. Korean tourist travels to Laos to buy women, and in some cases, children. In the years right after liberation, upscale traditional entertainment houses called yojang were at their peak. Over time, the role shifted to what Koreans call room salons. These are private drinking rooms with female hostesses. And for more than half a century since, room salons have quietly sat in the back rooms of Korean politics, business, and culture. The media scholar Kang Junman once called Korea a republic of partitions, meaning nobody asks what's happening behind the partition. There's a scene in the film Inside Man where a newspaper's editorial director, a prosecutor, and a lawmaker take off their clothes at one of these entertainment houses. They party with the hostesses. Audiences may have assumed this was exaggerated for drama. In reality, it's closer to a mix of several real sex bribery scandals and villa entertainment scandals that actually happened in Korea. And that scene shows something precise. What passes between the man in the room isn't a woman, it's bonding. The scholar Eve Sedgwick once described how bonds between men can form through a woman in a kind of triangle. The two men don't connect to each other directly. They connected by consuming one woman together. That's exactly why this works. Men feel a closeness at a room salon, sitting with a woman on either side, sharing what they call their guilty pleasure. And that closeness translates so easily into tight, ongoing ties in business, corruption, and crime. When people commit an offense together, betrayal stops being possible. Everyone is holding the same secret, so no one can afford to speak first. This is not friendship. It's closer to a kind of mutual assured destruction, a bond built entirely on a shared vulnerability. But this triangle wasn't invented by accident, one night in a room salon. The political philosopher Carole Pateman had an argument about this. Modern society's social contract looks like a public agreement among men, but underneath it, she said, sits an unspoken agreement about access to women's bodies. That agreement was there from the very beginning. If Sedgwick shows us how that bonding works in the moment, Pateman explains why it forms so easily and so often. This was a world where only men were ever granted the right to enter into that public contract in the first place. And in that world, access to women's bodies came bundled in as part of that same right. Men who bond over a woman in a room salon aren't inventing a new contract. They are simply carrying out, once again, one clause of a much older contract that was already sitting at the foundation of the world. The entertainment arranged by the Football Association isn't any different. Think about the people who came to protect the fairness of an international match. That was the public contract. And they carried out the private contract hiding underneath it without a flicker of discomfort. The bond forms between the men. The woman is only the medium that makes that bond possible. How satisfied a referee felt on a given night decided which way the whistle would blow the next day. So, in some strange sense, you could say women were the ones moving the world. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Even if they moved the world, these women were never recognized as the ones holding that power. No name remembered, no compensation given. They weren't even aware of what they would set in motion. They were used and then they disappeared. They didn't move the world simply took their bodies and used them. This kind of bonding becomes too dangerous the moment the people meant to watch over it are already inside it. In the Burning Sun scandal, the police themselves were part of the network. There was a group chat between the K-pop star Seungmi and the singer Jung Junyoung. Inside it, a serving police officer named Yoon Gyu-gun was nicknamed the Police Chief General. His real rank was actually far lower, but the nickname meant he held more power than the actual National Police Commissioner. In the end, this case was framed as the personal crimes of Seungmi and Jung Junyoung. Jung Junyoung received 5 years in prison for group sex assault and for filming and distributing illegal footage. Seungmi received 3 years for facilitating prostitution and financial crimes. But here's the question that had originally turned this into the Burning Sun scandal. Had police been covering for corruption at the club? That was never really answered. Yoon Gyu-gun was found not guilty on the core allegation that he would helped cover it up. He only received a fine on separate charges of violating capital markets law and instructing someone to destroy evidence. There was never really a clear line between the people who were supposed to enforce the law and the people who were supposed to be investigated by it. Then there's a judge, Ji Gui-yeon, who held an even heavier responsibility. He is the presiding judge who sentenced former President Yoon Suk-yeol to life in prison in the trial over the December 3rd martial law case. Allegations surfaced that he had accepted entertainment at a room salon along with photos. The Supreme Court's own audit committee concluded there wasn't enough basis for disciplinary action. But a separate anti-corruption agency kept investigating. They carried out a raid and summoned Judge Ji Gi-yeon for questioning as a bribery suspect. Since then, the investigation doesn't appear to have moved forward. What repeats across every one of these cases is the same pattern. Think about who was supposed to investigate all of this. They grew up inside that exact same drinking culture, that same world of corporate entertainment. Police buried evidence or let the clock run out. Prosecutors repeated the same phrase, insufficient evidence. The courts considered their job done by criticizing that delay after the fact, once it was already too late to matter. Politicians from every party ended up connected to these same allegations, and the press only pulled these files back out a decade later. Even then, it was only because it happened to line up with someone's political need. In the end, the people meant to watch, prosecute, judge, oversee, and report when all of this were part of the same circle. When the watchmen are already inside a bond, they are supposed to be watching. This cycle doesn't break on its own. Back when I worked in magazines in Gangnam, our office moved into new buildings. I went up to the rooftop one day and found, out of nowhere, something that looked like a bar. I learned later what it actually was. Houses around the Sinsa neighborhood had quietly been converted like this, used to entertain powerful men with celebrities. That was around the same time the actress Chang Ja-yeon cases was shaking the entire country. I still remember that rooftop bar clearly. I think it's because it never looked like a place that belonged to any red light district. It was an ordinary office building I passed every day on my way to work, sitting in an ordinary residential neighborhood. It didn't even need to hide. It blended so smoothly into the everyday fabric of the city that it didn't stand out at all. A story like this breaks once and then it fades. But the space where it could happen in the first place never makes the news. It just stays there, scattered across the city. That's why the Football Association scandal kept bringing me back to the rooftop. This isn't a story about a few staff members going rogue. It's a grammar this country spent more than half a century teaching itself. That grammar passed through room salons, traditional entertainment houses, and a rooftop in Shinsadong. And it eventually landed fully intact on a corporate card statement inside International Sports Administration. The word practice is a convenient one. It sounds like nobody started it and nobody is responsible for ending it. But the real weight of that word sits somewhere else entirely. Calling something a practice is actually a confession, an admission that this was never an exception. It was a feeling sitting quietly underneath the surface of the whole society. Sex work is clearly illegal in Korea, and yet people have gotten away with calling it practice precisely because it was never really a crime committed in hiding. It's an industry that everyone has known about and chosen to look away from. Spaces built for this kind of entertainment, room salons, massage parlors, rooftops like the one in Shinsadong, still exist everywhere in this country today. Crackdowns occasionally make the news, but nobody has ever heard the news that this industry itself has disappeared. The word practice is a script someone wrote a long time ago, and it only survives because people keep reading their lines. Someone who has actually been in that room, someone who has never been in that room but knows it exists and looks away anyway. And someone who knows this industry exists everywhere in this country and has never once stopped to think that's strange. Most of us fall into one of these three groups. So, what do you think? I'd love to know what you think about the practice of sex bribery involving international referees and this whole scandal at the Korean Football Association. And I think it's worth thinking together about what it would actually take to change this practice, this culture, this feeling that's been rooted in our society for so long. What would a real solution look like? If this video resonated with you, a like and a subscribe go a long way. And if you'd like to support the channel further, a membership always helps. This has been Hana's Island. You're safe here now. Until next time, stay well on the island that fits your own latitude perfectly.